The history of the human race is filled with thousands of conquests across different ages, regions, and cultures. However, few of them played such a decisive role in shaping future events as the Roman Republic's conquest of Greece, whose consequences echoed through the centuries. Welcome to our video, where we will explore Rome's first involvement in Greek affairs, the four Macedonian Wars, the Seleucid War, the Aetolian War, and the Achaean War. These long-form videos take an enormous amount of time to produce, so please consider sharing this video on your social media to support the channel. The year is 231 BC, and the Mediterranean world is engulfed in constant warfare and political turmoil. Just a decade earlier, the rapidly rising Roman Republic had defeated Carthage in the First Punic War, securing naval dominance over the sea. Meanwhile, in the east, the Hellenistic kingdoms, Macedon, Ptolemaic Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire, were locked in a relentless struggle for power. They competed fiercely for dominance over their border territories. Caught between these major powers were several smaller states, including Pergamon and the nominally independent Greek city-states. This was the political landscape of the late 3rd century BC, a world shaped by rivalry and instability. Yet this balance would not last long. A series of conflicts between two ambitious rising powers, Rome and Macedon, would soon transform the region forever and determine the future of Greece and the wider Mediterranean. To the northwest lay Illyria, covering much of what is now modern Albania and Dalmatia. During the mid to late 3rd century BC, Illyria was widely regarded as a barbarian land, only partially civilized through contact with its Greek and Macedonian neighbors. While interaction with the Greek world had encouraged some urban development in the south and along the coastline, politically the region remained fragmented. Illyria consisted of numerous small tribal communities, each ruled by its own chieftain. From their earliest encounters, Illyrians were viewed as violent and unpredictable by the more traditionally civilized societies around them. Occasionally, one tribe would rise to dominate the others. In the 230s BC, this temporary supremacy belonged to the Ardei tribe. Led by their energetic king, Agron, the Ardei forged a powerful union that united not only Illyrian tribes, but also influential outsiders, including Demetrius, the Greek lord of Pharos. This sudden rise coincided with the collapse of Epirus, a state whose former military strength had faded and whose monarchy fell apart. Exploiting this weakness, Illyrian forces pushed south beyond their traditional borders, invading Epirus and eventually capturing territory deep within the region. Their expansion reached its peak with the seizure of Phoenix, the wealthiest city of the Epirote kingdom, an event that shocked the Greek world and demonstrated Illyria's growing power. Despite these achievements, Agron died shortly afterward and was nominally succeeded by his young son. In practice, real authority passed to Agron's wife, Tuda, who was swiftly appointed regent. Her rise to power did nothing to curb Illyrian aggression. During her rule, piracy expanded dramatically, becoming a serious problem across the Adriatic and wider Mediterranean trade routes. These ports served as staging points from which pirates and brigands could launch their raids. While piracy in the Adriatic had existed for many years, the growing scale of the threat, the increasingly vocal complaints from Roman merchants, and the mounting economic damage to Roman trade finally pushed the Senate to take action. Surprisingly for a state known for its aggressive military responses, Rome did not immediately dispatch its legions. Instead, in 230 BC, the Senate chose a diplomatic approach and sent an embassy led by two brothers to investigate the situation. In the characteristically blunt manner of Roman diplomacy, the Coruncanius brothers confronted Queen Tuda directly. They condemned the rising tide of piracy and demanded that it be stopped at once. The ultimatum was clear and non-negotiable. Compliance would mean peace, refusal would mean war. Tuda rejected Rome's demands, either because she lacked the oath. Is clear, Roman operations were overwhelmingly successful across the region. Demetrius of Pharos, Tuda's appointed governor of the recently seized island of Corcyra, defected to the Roman side almost immediately. At the same time, forces loyal to the queen regent were defeated in open battle. By the spring of 228 BC, Tuta was forced to accept a peace treaty imposed by Rome. The agreement fractured her kingdom, restricted its power, and banned Illyrian piracy in the southern Adriatic. Roman forces then withdrew, leaving behind only Roman influence and formal amicitia, or friendship, a term that sounded harmless enough at first. Roman amicitia would soon prove to be anything but. In practice, being labeled a friend of Rome meant accepting the unwritten reality of becoming an informal client state, bound to Roman interests and expectations. One of the main beneficiaries of the peace settlement of 228 BC was Demetrius of Pharos, the former Illyrian defector. Rome rewarded him with a small but independent principality, positioned between the weakened remnants of the Ardean kingdom and the neighboring Greek city-states. Despite the advantages gained under Roman protection, Demetrius soon showed that he was far from satisfied with his limited domain. Not long after the treaty was finalized, he married Trituda, the biological mother of the young Ardean king. Through this marriage, Demetrius assumed the role of regent, effectively restoring the Illyrian power structure that Rome had dismantled during the First Illyrian War. Emboldened by his renewed authority, Demetrius began launching raids into the lands of tribes allied with Rome. These aggressive actions may have been an attempt to test Roman resolve, and the absence of an immediate response likely convinced him that Rome was either unwilling or unable to intervene. This assumption, however, was deeply mistaken. Rome was simply preoccupied with the Roman-Gallic War between 226 and 222 BC, and Demetrius's false confidence would ultimately prove fatal. Pushing his luck even further, Demetrius launched a major piratical campaign in the summer of 220 BC, sailing with 90 light galleys and attacking cities across the Adriatic Sea. This was a blatant violation of the treaty signed 8 years earlier. At this point, Demetrius had gone too far. Rome now judged that their former ally posed the same danger to Roman interests as Tuta once had and sought to punish him for betrayal and disloyalty. Rome's overwhelmingly large response in 219 BC was likely driven by the desire to resolve the Illyrian problem quickly and decisively before a looming war with Carthage. Demetrius attempted to defend Dymalum and Pharos, but Dymalum fell in 7 days, and a reckless sortie cost him Pharos itself. He escaped capture by preparing a squadron of galleys hidden within a secluded cove, fleeing to them once the battle was lost. From there, he sailed south, abandoning his family to Roman captivity and leaving his followers to be killed by Roman forces. Shortly afterward, Demetrius arrived at the Adriatic port of Actium, where the fleet of the Hellenistic ruler Philip V of Macedon lay at anchor. Upon arrival, Demetrius was warmly received and quickly became a trusted advisor at the Macedonian court. At the same time, Roman forces once again withdrew entirely from the region, leaving behind no permanent garrisons. As before, Rome departed having imposed its authority but maintaining only formal friendship. Yet this intervention sent a clear signal to the Macedonian kingdom to the south. Rome possessed both the ability and the will to intervene in eastern affairs. Before moving forward, it is necessary to briefly turn back the clock and examine Macedon after the death of its would-be conqueror Pyrrhus of Epirus, who fell at Argos. The victor of that struggle, Antigonus II Gonatas, had secured firm control of Macedon by 272 BC and extended his influence over the Greek city-states. After winning the loyalty of his restless homeland, Antigonus focused on preserving stability. He honored the Argead dynasty with a burial mound, reorganized provincial administration for efficiency, and ensured Macedonian coinage remained respected across the Greek world and beyond Greece. Taking advantage of Macedon's exhausted manpower and finances, Antigonus emphasized speed and access rather than sheer numbers. He relied heavily on the Antigonid navy and the powerful coastal fortresses of Demetrius, Chalcis, and Corinth, using them to transport troops quickly to key strategic positions. Despite these measures, an Athenian-led revolt backed by Ptolemaic Egypt attempted to break free from Macedonian control during the Cremonidian War, fought between 268 and 261 BC. This effort ultimately failed, and Antigonus succeeded in suppressing the rebellion. Even so, his reign was not without losses, as important strongholds, including the Acrocorinth, slipped from Macedonian control. Antigonus's long rule finally came to an end in 239 BC with his death. He was succeeded by Demetrius II, whose reign lasted for roughly a decade. This period was comparatively quiet, yet Macedon's overall position continued to deteriorate, and Demetrius died in 229 BC. His son, Philip V, was still a child at the time and could not realistically rule during such a dangerous era. A regency was therefore necessary, and a distant member of the Antigonid dynasty, Antigonus Doson, was selected. Though often overlooked, Doson proved capable, raising Philip as his own son while vigorously campaigning to restore Macedonian strength. He first marched north and drove the Illyrian forces out of the kingdom, before turning south and decisively defeating the Aetolian League. With his frontiers secured, Antigonus chose not to overextend himself. Instead, he formally renounced all Macedonian claims south of the pass of Thermopylae, aiming to stabilize the situation at home and rebuild Macedon's strength. In response to these successes, the army proclaimed Antigonus king. He accepted the title, yet did not displace the young Philip V, whose rights to the throne remained intact. Antigonus promptly named Philip as his official heir, ensuring dynastic continuity. Following further victories, including the first recorded capture of Sparta by a foreign army, Antigonus III Doson died in 221 BC. He left behind a revived, secure, and increasingly powerful Macedonian state. Philip V then ascended to the throne, inheriting both the kingdom and its restored influence. Soon after Philip's accession, Macedonian dominance was again challenged by the Aetolian League and its allies during the Social War of 220 to 217 BC. They believed Philip's youth made him weak and easily manipulated. It was in the course of this conflict that Demetrius of Pharos arrived at the Macedonian court, seeking refuge and influence. At the same time, dramatic events in the Western Mediterranean began to command wider attention. In 218 BC, the Second Punic War erupted. The Carthaginian general Hannibal famously crossed the Alps and invaded Italy, where he swiftly defeated a Roman army at the Trebia River. News of Rome's devastating defeats encouraged Philip V to reconsider his strategic priorities. Believing the Roman Republic to be on the brink of collapse, he began to look westward for expansion. This shift in policy was strongly supported by Demetrius of Pharos, who, after being driven from his Adriatic holdings by Rome, urged Philip to bring the social war to an end, seize control of the Illyrian coastline, and ultimately carry the conflict directly into Italy. Accepting the existing balance of power in Greece, Philip concluded peace at Naupactus and formally ended the war. He then turned his attention northward, once again expelling Illyrian forces from Macedonian territory. During the winter of 217 BC, he ordered the construction of a fleet of 100 light warships in preparation for operations across the Adriatic. In the summer of 216 BC, Philip launched his first serious attempt to secure the Illyrian coast. However, upon receiving reports that a Roman fleet was approaching, he abandoned the expedition and withdrew back to Macedon without engaging. Rome's catastrophic defeat at Cannae soon afterward marked another turning point. Sensing opportunity, Philip dispatched envoys to Hannibal to negotiate a formal alliance. He clearly hoped to align himself with the apparent victor and profit from Rome's misfortune. According to later accounts, one envoy, Xenophanes, was captured by a Roman praetor en route, but cleverly secured his release by claiming he was traveling to negotiate peace with Rome instead. This balance shifted late in 212 BC, when Philip once again reached the Adriatic coast. Forcing his way through the interior, he captured the coastal stronghold of Lissus, a strategically valuable fortress and potential staging base. At this point, Roman leaders recognized that the growing Macedonian threat could no longer be ignored. Directly confronting Philip exceeded Rome's military capacity while the Carthaginian War continued, so the Senate turned diplomacy into a strategic weapon. Rather than fight alone, Rome sought to encourage Greek states to contain Macedon on its behalf. An alliance was soon concluded with the Aetolian League, long hostile to Macedonian influence. The Aetolians were persuaded largely by recent Roman successes in the Punic War, particularly the victories at Capua and Tarentum during the summer of 211 BC. The treaty offered favorable terms. Any towns or cities captured by the Aetolians would become theirs, while movable plunder would belong to Rome unless a settlement was taken jointly. Provisions also allowed additional allies to join the coalition, including Sparta, Elis, Messenia, Illyrian groups, and even Pergamum. The resulting conflict proved frustrating and indecisive. Roman forces seized several key positions, such as Anacyra, but Philip V countered. Efforts to negotiate peace by neutral states collapsed in 207 BC, largely due to Rome's deliberate obstruction of any settlement that might benefit Macedon. However, by 206 and 205 BC, both sides were gradually forced toward peace as exhaustion set in. Although the treaty signed at Phoenix formally ended the conflict for the moment, it was clear that Rome's resentment toward King Philip V had not faded. The Romans had not forgotten his attempt to exploit their weakness during the Second Punic War, and punishment was merely delayed. What was undeniable, however, was that Rome was steadily emerging victorious from its struggle with Carthage. With the decisive defeat of Hannibal approaching, Rome would soon be free to direct its full military and political power eastward. When Philip V learned of Rome's crushing victory over Carthage at Zama in 202 BC, he did not moderate his conduct. Instead, he continued his aggressive policies, turning his attention toward the weakening kingdom of Ptolemaic Egypt, a move that deeply alarmed many smaller states in the region. Since 207 BC, Egypt had been sliding into rapid decline. Following the final division of Alexander's successor kingdoms at Ipsus, the Eastern Mediterranean had long been stabilized by a balance of power among three dominant Hellenistic states: Antigonid Macedon, Ptolemaic Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire. When one power grew too strong, the other two acted as a counterweight, preventing the rise of a single hegemon and preserving the independence of smaller states. This delicate balance began to unravel in 205 BC, when priests of the Egyptian god Amon exploited widespread dissatisfaction with Ptolemaic rule and proclaimed a rival pharaoh. The resulting rebellion devastated the kingdom, severing Upper Egypt from Alexandria's control. As central authority weakened, disorder and lawlessness spread unchecked. The situation deteriorated even further in 204 BC with the sudden death of King Ptolemy IV. He was succeeded by his 6-year-old son, Ptolemy V, whose minority sparked bitter struggles over the regency. These internal conflicts paralyzed the government and left Egypt dangerously exposed. Unfortunately, this weakness came at the worst possible time. The First Macedonian War had only recently concluded. Rome was rising to unmatched power, and Seleucid King Antiochus III had returned victorious from his eastern campaigns. Both rulers now cast their eyes upon the vulnerable overseas territories of Ptolemaic Egypt, setting the stage for the Second Macedonian War.